Michael and I are super pleased to be able to kick off with you the first in this series. Megan, if you want to get us started with the first slide. Thank you. Also, as we're beginning the piece of this today, we're going to be possibly later wanting you to reference your personal outcome measures manual. So if you have a copy of your hard book near you, or if you can access an electronic soft version, that would be great. It'll be a little bit later on though in the webinar. Before we get started with the major content of what today's webinar is all about, we really would like to ask for your help, though, before we get started. In the Q&A box that Megan referenced, I'd like to ask if you might take just a moment to type in and share with us one of the social roles that you perform. Again, it's in the Q&A box, and if you could just briefly type in what social role is important to you, that would be great. We will be responding to those, your entries in just a little bit. Many of you are familiar with the Council on Quality and Leadership and have partnered with us either as a trainer, your organization, or are interested in your continuing development on your person-centered journey. But it is important for us to clearly revisit and mention that our vision at CQL is a vision of a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people. Our mission is that CQL is dedicated to defining, measuring, and improving personal quality of life. Today, we're going to be drilling down a little bit more in this defining, measuring piece of it as it applies to the personal outcome measures of people perform different social roles. Since 1969, CQL has been a leader in working with human service organizations and systems to continuously define, measure, and improve quality of life and quality of services for youth, for adults, and for older adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and psychiatric disabilities. CQL offers accreditation, training, certification, research, and consultation services to agencies that share our vision of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people. Quality of life is why CQL has committed to partnering with providers like you and systems for organizational transformation. Quality is a continuous journey. The personal outcome measures is an excellent tool to help us learn about people, about how you support people, and how you identify ways that you can change what you and your organization do to influence support systems. This change, this journey is what inspires us to commit to partnering with you, with service providers and with system organizations for organizational change and transformation. It's that change, that enhancement piece which motivates us. And we, as I said, Michael and I are very pleased to be a part of your continued enhancement and learning about the use of the personal outcome measures that applies today. And we hope you can join us for later on as well. Data, the next slide, is really what drives us. Change is measured and is through data. That is what drives us as CQL, and we are committed to continuing to collect, to analyze, and to report on things, and it is evident in everything we do. As a result, we have multiple sources to assist in these efforts. The data informs and guides decisions for people supported, for organizations, and for large systems. Recently, CQL has published some research on facilitating fair wages for people with developmental disabilities. In that research article, you will find data that reflects our driven database. The data includes new peer-reviewed research about sub-minimum wage. It includes analysis of the impact of organizational supports on fair wages and discussion of disparities where targeted supports are needed. Additionally, earlier in May of this year, another CQL research alert was sent out. It was titled, ongoing staff development improves the health and safety of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. In that publication, and in that was data analysis of impact of ongoing staff development on health-related outcomes. There was also peer-reviewed research about the direct support professionals' workforce crisis. We encourage you to continue to sign up for these research alerts, and that will be available on our website, which we will be including on that follow-up email after the webinar today. This is really about who we are at the crux of CQL is, as you know, person-centeredness is at the heart of what we do, and this is the focus that guides us along our journey. We're glad that you're a part of that, and we're glad to be partnered with you on yours. In the early 1990s, CQL realized that people who use services were missing from the table. CQL invited people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, people with lived experience in mental health services, parents, and thought leaders to join in focus groups to look at quality measures. There was a big difference in what people and their families wanted compared to what professionals wanted. The personal outcome measures were then piloted in 2 states, 3 organizations, and field tested in the United States and Canada. In 1993, the first personal outcome measure tool with 30 personal outcome measures was published. In 2005, data analysis led to combine several of the outcome factors, reducing the number to 21. At multiple stages, factor analysis and validation testing continued to demonstrate the validity of the 21 outcomes. CQL's initiative to redefine quality in terms of personal outcomes using the personal outcome measures subsequently influenced person-centered approaches at the state and federal CMS level and within the disability community. Recently, in 2017, CQL completed a revalidation of the personal outcome measures and demonstrated continued validity of the 21 outcomes. Based on statistical relevance, they were reorganized into 5 factors. The personal outcome measures continue to offer person-centered solutions that work to help people keep people happy and safe, offer people real choice, and wisely direct valuable resources. On the next slide, we're going to see the circle of the personal outcome measures factors. These new factor areas have been reorganized into the 5 factor areas here are my human security, my community, my relationships, my goals, and my choices. We're going to spend a little bit more time today talking about the factor area of my relationships because that is where the outcome of today's webinar, people perform different social roles, falls. People perform different social roles. Again, for today, that is going to be the crux of our discussion. We first want to, though, place this in the context of that factor area that I just referenced of my relationships. Relationships produce a sense of belonging. They can be formal, they can be informal, they can be biological, or they can be chosen. Relationships truly are personally defined. CQL believes relationships create links to the greater world, which promotes then a blanket of security and help people who receive supports to develop and maintain social roles. One of those relationships plays out in how we decide to perform our different social roles. I wanted to thank all of you. It looks like we've got quite a few of responses in the Q&A box about your social roles. I wonder, Megan, would you mind selecting some of them that came up there about what people submitted? And we apologize, just based on the numbers of people who are on the call today and number of responses, we may not be able to get to all of them, but really appreciate taking the time to share. Megan?
Yes, we've had lots of responses of people saying that they're a mother, a friend, a spouse, other family members. Lisa says she's a member of a local Lions Club. Roxanne says she's a room parent at school. Leah belongs to a Harley group and has a Lake family. And Phyllis says that a social role that is important to her as part of her job is being a POM trainer.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for sharing some of those social roles and absolutely incorporated into those roles as mother and spouse and Lions Club member or PTA parent group member and Harley group, personal outcome measures trainer. Those are all things that you find provide value to you and provide value to others. So thank you for sharing that. That's exactly what we were looking for, a tremendous kind of range of what we're talking about today. So thank you. We hope to cover with you on this webinar. Michael and I spent some time looking over how it might flow best, and we hope that this works for everybody. It seemed to make sense to us. We're going to provide some information on the introduction about people performing different social roles. We're going to talk about key concepts of that personal outcome measures. We're going to address and hopefully engage with you a little bit on information gathering strategies and techniques. We're going to move into, once we've had robust and sufficient information gathering, how that promotes effective decision making on this personal outcome measure. We're going to address some of the common and potential misconceptions that there might be. We do have a few previously submitted questions that we want to address with you, and then we're also going to share some resources. But also remember that after the webinar today, in about a week, you will be getting some additional information from following up from this webinar. So thank you. We continue to build consistency and reliability with our decision-making, information gathering, and data around the personal outcome measures. This, today, the people performing different social roles, is the first of several webinars where we hope to provide some guidance, allow a little bit of discussion, and provide some information to that end. Other webinars will focus on, as I said, some additional personal outcome measures, and we'll reference that list at the end of the webinar today. Again, we continue to encourage you to visit CQL's website for registration information on these and other webinars. Continuing on in our introduction of this personal outcome measures, it's important to really get the framework of this. Performing different social roles is about status and respect. It enhances other outcomes in our life, such as health and employment. Performing different social roles also promotes opportunities to build connections outside of the service delivery network, outside of the service setting. People who may lack experience with should receive support to choose personal social roles based on their experiences, preferences, and passions. The roles we perform in life really express about who we are and what is important to us. They help to demonstrate who we are to ourselves and to others. People who are supported by organizations may need guidance or support to perform those social roles. How and where we want to give back is important as well in considering where people want to perform different social roles. Next slide. Some of the key concepts about social roles are going to be following in the additional slides here, but we really want this to continue in that framework of what are the key components about this outcome of people performing different social roles. Social roles is broader, potentially less concrete than some of the other outcome areas within this factor of my relationships. It really represents the impact that someone has. Where does a person wish to leave her or his social footprint? It goes from being present to an active participator. We see performing social roles as an active role versus one that has been inherited or as a basic family member. So, for example, most all of us have some type of biological connection. We're a son, a daughter, a sister, a brother, but when we're talking about that as it applies to this outcome, it's taking on duties and additional responsibilities and assuming different tasks as related to that role. It's more of an expansion of oneself into performing certain things based on personally defined interests or values. Performing social roles entails these concepts. So let's go over these with a little bit more detail. We frame this outcome as being basing social roles on people's interests and passions. So, for example, if a person has an interest in practicing a certain faith, might there also be an interest in taking on some other duties rather than just attending a service? Might the person be interested in hosting study groups? Might the person be interested in leading outreach programs? Might the person be interested in other types of organizational groups that are not solely linked to attending a service? Typically within performing social roles, there is some sort of or some form of reciprocity. It may not be something that is seen, but rather it might be felt by the person or someone else. There's active engagement in performing social roles. There's something attached to that interest. There's something attached to do with that passion. Sometimes it may be seen as giving of oneself or contributing to another person, to a cause, to an organization. And nowadays, we have to consider that some of this may also be taking virtually or through social media and with technology-based supports. We've heard recently of an example now during the pandemic of how people are hosting open and virtual mic nights. They're hosting trivia nights through virtual social media platforms. So what roles people prefer to perform and identify help to express people's unique qualities. Now that we've talked about some of those common basic understanding, potentially we need to frame these things in the outcome of people perform different social roles. We want to move into how do we gather the information about those components of a person's life. So we'd like to review a few of the techniques for discovery that apply to approaching and gathering information on all the 21 personal outcome measures, not solely to this outcome measure. So again, in your question and answer box, I'd like to ask for you to list one strategy that you have found successful when gathering information, when you meet with a person, asking him or her about the personal outcome measures. So in the Q&A box, if you could just type in one strategy or technique that you have found helpful in gathering information for any of the personal outcome measures. And again, we'll later return to your responses. While you're helping us with that, in the Q&A box, I do want to talk with you about some of the values and principles around this outcome. Some of those include people who fill a variety of different social roles are more likely to be respected and valued members of the larger community. Support from us as organizations and supporters should also provide access to people for opportunities to learn about, information on technology and skill development. People are always recognized as capable of assuming different social roles, and people are supported to carry out some of those responsibilities and duties and activities with those roles. So an example of that might be a person during your conversation has identified with you a real interest in doing something about social injustices. So the person learns and is supported to organize some friends and families to learn how to campaign for civil equality. The person may have an interest on taking on developing a blog or a web-based group to develop peaceful action steps to address the injustices, or it could take on many different facets. Those are just potential examples. So as we are talking about information gathering, we really do want to put this in the context of this being a conversation. Personal outcome measures, we intend for it to be much less of an interview and much more of a conversation. So where or how do we begin that conversation, or how do we make that conversation flow? We really try to take the opportunity to bridge upon what people say. Certain pieces that come out during our conversation with people may help bridge to other areas. And of course, we're just talking about general human conversations in practice, all the things that we do in any conversation, to be curious, to be probing, to be inquisitive, respectfully, of course. Might we take a cue from the environment or something the person said? Examples might be a certain clothing style or a certain type of decoration that a person uses, something that a person maybe mentioned in another area of our conversation. Does the person mention an interest in playing on a sports team or practicing some type of art? Or maybe it was a dream that the person has of someday having children. So we use those things to bridge the conversation and provide a natural flow as we potentially apply and address these to the personal outcome measure of people perform different social roles. Of course, the goal is for us to follow the person's lead, and the flow is directed as much as we can by the person. Discovering people's interest as it applies to personal outcome measures, information gathering, is really our opportunity to build those things into our conversation, to find out where people's interests lie. If people have shared with us that they interact with other members and have opportunities for engagement with other members in the community, we may be able to see evolution of social roles, of performing duties or taking on additional responsibilities in those areas. Widening the net, so to speak, knowing what existing links people have and potentially desired roles they wish to perform is helpful in discovering what this means to them, how they define that outcome. So broadening the scope of our information gathering helps to unfold the essence of the person. And again, as we mentioned earlier, nowadays we need to consider more than just face-to-face opportunities. We also need to explore how people are performing social roles virtually. As I'd mentioned, the virtual online mic nights. Also, additional examples might be a Facebook group, online gaming. How are people performing social roles in those areas? But again, having said that, we need to continue to look at the duties and responsibilities that are associated with those roles, even in virtual mediums. Continuing on, what is important for us to build robust information gathering skills and strategies is that we need to really look at people's interests and the involvement that people display in participating and interacting with other members of the community. These can provide potential clues for additional opportunities. People's interests can contribute to developing social roles and are important for us to explore. For example, it might be that a person is singing currently in a choir, but is this all that they want? Are there other musical opportunities that they wish to pursue? Being in a band, leading the choir, starting a musical theater, being involved in musical theater, playing an instrument. Discussing these possibilities with people can be helpful. Emphasizing people's choice of what things they want and who matters most is important for us to also focus on. Then we ask about, do the opportunities people have to experience these interests, do they match with what their preferences are? We need to emphasize people's definition. And later in the webinar, we're going to be addressing how these apply to the decision-making component. But before decision-making, we certainly need to ensure that we have robust information to make adequate decisions in the information gathering, from the information gathering to decision-making. Now we would like to hear a little bit from Megan, if you wouldn't mind, what some of those strategies or techniques are that people shared with us.
Absolutely. There was one that was very interesting to me. Donna says that when she introduces herself, she talks a little bit about herself and things that she likes. And there's usually something that they can find in common and they work from there. Robin says she asks a person to tell me what a particular outcome will look like to them. Several people says that they like to use pictures to assist with information gathering. Just talking and holding conversations give you a lot of answers.
Thank you, Megan. And again, thank you to all of you who took the time to share some of those techniques and strategies. And I know I can see a whole lot more there, and we apologize that we just don't have the more than our allotted time. But I think one of the common themes that I heard throughout all of that about personalizing it, finding ground, finding out what people, how people personally define the outcomes, using pictures that people can use that make sense to them, just talking to people. You know, the common denominator there is the individualization, the personalization of that. So thank you. You guys are already there. I appreciate all of that input. So for successful information gathering, I think you all have, encapsulated that in the personalization of what you entered in your Q&A comments. We follow people's clues. We use hints provided by the person. Those things can be revealing for us. Sometimes people talk about real concerns that they have in life or potential fears. For example, recently I met with someone who has a concern about the environment, and just following up with some additional probing questions was to find out what interests or what it was that was of concern to them, how do they feel that they are interacting enough and contributing enough to make the change that they wanted to see. We discussed local, online, national, international groups. We talked about campaigns that there are out there, action groups, local clubs, and all of that. So that was a way for me to kind of figure out where the person really wanted to have play a pretty significant part. Another example that I mentioned earlier was sometimes people mention their wish to have a family or to have a life partner, and that leads us to ask some additional questions of them about how important that is, how things are going in that arena with people. So again, the information gathering piece of this that we've been addressing is really about that art of conversation. And it's not going to be a script that will be the same from time to time, which you all highlighted in your techniques and strategies. So thank you for that. For those of you who are familiar with CQL and most of our training components and training offerings, as we talk about this concept of the 3 E's: education, experience, and exposure. These are basic tenets to most of the personal outcome measures and are really needed in order for people to make informed choice. And certainly these apply to this personal outcome measures of people performing different social roles. We need to know what opportunities has the person had to explore, to experience, and be exposed to different options. To perform different social roles, the 3 E's are needed to make personally informed choices. Now that we've addressed the major components of information gathering around this outcome, we're going to move into the decision-making piece of this, and I'm going to turn that over to Michael.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Decision-making is where we decide whether personal outcomes and individualized supports are present. It's important that we apply all of the evidence that we've collected So to review, there are several important considerations. And first, it's one person at a time. Next, it's having an awareness of the important information about the personal outcome measures, such as the values and the principles. And then, as we just covered, there's the information gathering and discovery piece. This includes all of the information collected from the person's supporters, from what we've observed in the environment, and sometimes written materials. And finally, the decision-making component. So the outcome has a series of questions that lead to a decision about whether the outcome in individualized supports are present or not. This decision-making process presents questions in a decision-making matrix for measuring both the outcome and the individualized support for the person. And now some decision-making basics. If you do have your manual available, please follow along. When making decisions, always use the manual and always reference the additional considerations on the bottom of page 66. There have been several revisions since we published the current version of the manual. So on page 66, you should have a question 16.4 that reads, is the person satisfied with the number of social roles they have? Then the first line at the exclamation mark should read, if the answers to 16.1, 16.2, 16.3, and 16.4 are yes, the outcome is present. If your manual does not have 16.4, please download a current version of the manual available on our website. Always ask yourself, how do you know this is enough for the person in terms of their preferred variety and scope? How does the person see him or herself viewed by others in these social roles? And how are they valued, acknowledged, recognized, and what duties do they have linked to these social roles? So to review, our decision-making criteria for the outcome of people perform different social roles is 16.1, does the person have a social role? Next, we need to evaluate, does the person fill a variety of social roles? Is the person satisfied with both the type of social roles they have, and is the person satisfied with the number of social roles they have? If the answers to 16.1, 16.2, 16.3, and 16.4 are yes, then the outcome is present. If the answers to 16.1 and 16.2 is no, is this a result of an informed personal choice? Now that piece is very important. Remember, if it is an informed personal choice, we must have evidence that the person has had the opportunity for experience, education, and exposure to make that informed personal choice. And now to review the decision-making criteria for the supports for people perform different social roles. Does the organization know what social roles the person currently fills? Has the organization assessed the person's interests in assuming additional roles or expanding current roles and responsibilities? Are supports provided to assist the person with performing chosen social roles if needed and requested? So based on the answers to these questions, we can decide, are individualized supports in place that facilitate this outcome? So remember, the support is active rather than passive. If needed and requested does not mean that we are waiting for the person to ask us to support them. Rather, there is an active process in place for us to engage the person in ensuring that this outcome is met per their definition. So we also have some additional considerations in evaluating whether or not these outcomes and supports are in place. So the person must be acknowledged and recognized in the particular social role and supported to assume all aspects and responsibilities that typically accompany that role in order for the outcome to be present. A greater range of type and complexity of social roles is expected of people who have greater capabilities and supports to perform these roles. So in order to assess, the person really must be asked. Again, we really need to be engaging the person. We need to look at what has been attempted and offered with our supports, and has the person declined any of those opportunities? We really need to look at what responsibilities the person has, what acknowledgement exists, what recognition they receive, and what duties that person performs. So in terms of applying the decision-making, earlier we discussed the importance of the 3 E's, education, experience, and exposure. They are crucial in making decisions about this outcome and supports. And the 3 E's are crucial for a robust life experience to make informed decisions. If people are not performing social roles, there must be an informed personal choice. How have the 3 E's played out in the person's life to know that he or she is satisfied? In terms of making decisions about individualized supports, we must know the person's preferences. We must provide support to the person. We must ensure a broad array of social role options pursued with the person, and we must assist people to learn new or additional skills. People seem to look for a magic number of social roles during decision-making instead of taking a personal approach based on who the person is and his or her duties. The word variety is vague, but that's intended. It is part of the information gathering and decision-making to ensure we gather sufficient information to know how the person defines this outcome. How does a person know if he or she is satisfied with the type of roles unless education, experience, and exposure have been provided? Making sure the social roles are true performing actions and roles where people are consistently involved, making a difference, and recognized as making a contribution to a greater good. This could be to another person, to a group, to an organization, large or small, in person, or possibly online, but it is always personally defined. For individualized supports, ensuring that these supports are robust, expansive, and provided based on a personal interest. Not necessarily taking a group of people to do Meals on Wheels once a month or a group of 8 people volunteering at the local thrift store. The person should have true ownership over their social role. Now we wanted to address some of the common misconceptions around people perform different social roles. Performing a social role goes beyond simply being present. There should be some type of active engagement, ownership, and reciprocity. Each person defines how many or how few social roles they desire and what those social roles look like. Some people may want one strong social role and others may want many smaller social roles. It is up to us to find out their preferences. We need to be sure that the person has had the education, experience, and exposure necessary to make an informed choice regarding their personally defined type, frequency, and scope. Simply having a title such as son, employee, friend, or employee does not always mean that a person is performing a social role or that the person has this outcome met. We often see people using the tool note that the person is an aunt or a daughter, and therefore people perform social roles is indicated as present. What is required is looking at this with a more critical eye. What is the person known for within that role? Is the person the relative that always brings the best dessert during the holidays? Are they the coworker that always makes the coffee in the morning? We really need to look at how the person is making a contribution. We need to look at reciprocity and the recognition that the person receives for performing that role. Participating in group projects such as volunteering may or may not be a social role. Once again, we need to ask who that role belongs to. Does it belong to the agency or does it belong to the person? Social roles for people receiving services should look similar to social roles for people who do not. The organization's role is to provide active engagement and opportunities. We often hear they never said they wanted to do that, but it truly is up to us to find out what the person wants and how they define that outcome. Just because someone might be missed, this may not be sufficient. They must be missed in the role along with meeting all of the other criteria that we've talked about today. So with your registrations for this webinar, we solicited your questions about this outcome. Many of the questions had similar themes, and we've selected a couple with similar themes to respond to. We will later have a recording available of this webinar. So I'm going to turn it back over to Anne. Anne is going to answer the first question.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, and actually within the question, Megan, next slide, is almost sort of the answer. The first question that we're going to address today is, what is the best way to educate people supported around social roles? So first of all, as we've talked about in our information gathering piece of this, we always must converse with the person first. During our conversation, as we talked about earlier, we explore interests and passions. We use hints or clues that people share. Michael had mentioned something about observing things in certain and different environments. That also may be a clue for us to follow up on. We did not spend a lot of time talking about this, but at times it's important for us to gather information with the person's approval from other people in their network, very close friends or people who know the individual well. Then we've really got to look at and determine, as Michael talked about in the decision-making piece of this, those 3 E's. And it sort of is, we sort of prompted this in your question wording here about education. That is one of the 3 E's. So we continue to support the person to explore and experience different things, as well as that education people. And we continue to loop back with the person to assess, are they satisfied with the type, frequency, and scope? And are they interested, as we'd mentioned earlier, in possibly expanding it or moving into additional ways? Basically, I think a simple answer to this, and it's not so simple, but it's easily stated, is it's the individual application of the 3 E's. Because as we learn about and are exposed to new opportunities, people may show us more of an interest in other areas, but we would not know that about how to educate and support that person without the experience and exposure. So our role as supporters is to provide new and varying experiences. I mentioned an earlier experience I had with someone. I also met with someone who had learned about a local city project and an initiative to improve green spaces in the greater metropolitan area, and was very interested in being a part of that. But then as he learned about this, he thought, well, gosh, I wanted to also do something like that in my local township. So in his local township, he was able to build a group of his own in his local neighborhood to carry on some of those same green space initiatives closer to home. So I hope that's somewhat of an answer, but it's in a simple answer, it's the 3 E's. And there was another question that I think Michael is going to take on. Michael?
All right, thank you, Anne. So our next question, Megan, next slide. Our next question was about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on performing different social roles. Certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on many outcomes for almost every person in our society. Whether it's participating in the life of the community, spending time with friends, family or loved ones, or performing different social roles, the pandemic has affected many aspects of our daily lives. It's important to remember that each person defines their outcomes based on their own personal experiences and the present set of circumstances that they are experiencing. To reduce the risk of virus transmission, we have had to practice social distancing, making it difficult for us to perform social roles that involve being close to other people. So depending on our own personal definition, this may mean that the outcome would currently not be present for us, because we really need to evaluate the outcomes in the present tense. Even though the outcome is not present, if our supports are working to identify other alternative opportunities that might be available and continuing to engage us to understand how we define this outcome, it is possible that the individualized supports could still be present. The types of social roles available to people during a pandemic or other type of emergency has changed, and it may change based on whatever circumstances we are currently experiencing. While we may have had to take a break from singing in the choir or playing shortstop on the softball team, other opportunities to perform social roles have emerged. And we've heard a lot of great stories. I'm going to share an example from Megan, who you heard earlier. Megan, because she's so good at Zoom, is now the Zoom facilitator for her quilting group. So that's just one example of different types of social roles, opportunities that exist during a pandemic, but it does look very different, certainly. As we continue to practice social distancing and doing things that are a little different than what we used to do. Okay, so at this point, we wanted to take a moment to talk about some other upcoming webinars in this series. The next one we currently do have live up on our site. You can go ahead and register on our website. That will be on July 16th, 2020 from 2 to 3 Central Time. And that is People Live in Integrated Environments. And please join us as well for the other webinars in this series on exercise rights, continuity and security, intimate relationships, treated fairly, respect, and choose services. And if you haven't done so already, please join our Facebook e-community. So that is on Facebook. You can search for CQL e-community or use the URL on your screen. And there's a lot of really great conversations that happen on the e-community. There's a lot of sharing of resources and discussion. So I encourage you all to check that out. So at this point, we will thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to talking with you again in the future.